questions.
You know that the David Newry inquiry did seek Andrea Vance's emails and access swipe card records. Will you be extending the apology to Andrea Vance?
Well, I think the right place for that to occur is Parliamentary Services. I mean, if you think about the swipe card, as soon as we found out about that, and Mr Henry did ask for that information, I made it quite clear publicly I thought that was wrong. In terms of the emails, well, Mr Henry did ask for the emails once he'd gone through a process of wanting to understand the content, and I think in that regard my Chief of Staff followed absolutely the right protocol, directed that towards Mr Dunne's office, but clearly Parliamentary Services made a mistake in sending it out, even though it couldn't be opened and it was recalled.
Do you still have confidence in Andrew Vance?
Sorry. And they have. I mean, Jeff Thorne as the former now head of Parliamentary Services, and David Carter as the Speaker with responsibility for Parliamentary Services have apologised, and I think that's rightfully so.
And do you concede that Henry did seek that information contrary to what you said in the House last week?
Well, he did ask for that information, but of course, I mean, that was known because he wanted the information to be able to look at the content. The point was, he also asked for that information for staff members, and that could be given. But in terms of Peter Dunne, no, that's something that was up to Mr Dunne to decide whether he wanted to release it or not, and as we know, he wouldn't.
Do you still have confidence in Andrew Vance?
I do. Look, what is clear is that I think, if not sooner, certainly not last Friday, but Friday week, when it became clear that the answers that Parliamentary Services had provided to the Speaker to respond on their behalf were wrong, then there was also another piece of information that Mr Kibblewhite was aware of. Now, I think he should have put that in the public domain at that point. In his defence, he was on bereavement leave. It was a very challenging set of circumstances for him, but nevertheless, that information should have been out in the public domain.
Shouldn't it have been with you, given the no surprises policy? Shouldn't somebody have made that to you a month ago when it came to light?
Well, I mean, you can go through the intros of all this stuff, but the guts of it is that because it was sent, but not in the format that could be open and then recalled within an hour, the way that Mr Kibblewhite viewed that was that it didn't form part of the inquiry because the information was never seen and never opened and never reviewed. Now, I think that's a pretty narrow definition, but that's looking at it from a bureaucracy perspective, not looking at it from a political perspective. But in defence of Mr Kibblewhite, he runs the bureaucracy. You know, he's not a politician. He's not part of a political office. So yes, you know, we might all view that in a different way, but he didn't see it from a political perspective. Yes, but I certainly wouldn't accept his resignation. As I said, you know, there are extenuating circumstances of why it wasn't, that information wasn't made available Friday a week ago. As I said, he was on bereavement leave.
So he's apologised and offered his resignation?
Well, he certainly would have offered his resignation if I wanted it, and I've made it quite clear to him I didn't want it. I mean, I made it quite clear that it would have been better if I'd known that information in a timely fashion, but I wasn't.
So he never did? Never came out?
Sorry,
Just to clarify, so he never actually offered it at all?
Like, I think he made it pretty clear to me, it was implicit in the conversation he was having with me that if I wanted his resignation it would have been there, but I just don't feel it's appropriate.
Isn't that offering it?
Yes, in so many words.
And did he apologise?
He has, yes.
And do you have to correct any answers in Parliament this week?
No, I don't think so, no.
Just on the John Stevenson thing, you posed a hypothetical that maybe his phone records could get swept up in an investigation on the Taliban.
Yeah.
Is that your understanding of what actually happened?
No, I'm just saying that was a hypothetical example.
Prime Minister, on Tuesday you asked a question with that two-line email that blamed the guy from Datacom.
Yeah.
We now know that they've been forwarded by someone in Parliamentary Service as well. I mean, are you sure you're not going to make any corrections as well?
No, because they're absolutely correct at the time I answered the question.
Were you aware of the Andrew Kibble of this other information on Tuesday?
No.
So you didn't find out of that till Thursday or till Friday?
No, on Friday late morning I found out about the email being, or the information being sent containing the emails and them being recalled, and I only actually found out about the second person actually following up and sending that information when I read it in the paper.
It seems amazing that between Tuesday, when you've answered that question, and Friday, that nobody alerted you to the various other failures or various other, the other parts of this email record which show a completely different picture than the bit that you tabled in the House.
No, I don't think they do show a different picture.
Well, they do, because they show a great deal more information was provided. They show it was asked for in a sort of messy and complicated way, and that there was a great deal of confusion. And you presented answers in the House on Tuesday, which seemed to imply that this was some sort of small snafu.
That's right, and that's the way I would see it.
You still see this as a small, unfortunate incident which was nobody's responsibility?
No, I haven't said that. I think it's the responsibility of Parliamentary Services, and I think it's quite right that Jeff Thorne's offers his resignation.
Sorry, you called this inquiry. It was conducted under your auspices.
Yep.
And for a document which wasn't secret, so it wasn't particularly important. We now see from the email trail that you went to an enormous extent to get information from your...
No, that's actually not correct. I didn't do that.
Well, the inquiry went to a great level of depth in getting information from your ministers, which I wonder how happy they were about having their records trawled through in that manner.
Well, their records weren't trawled through in that manner. Their metadata was.
Well, there was 966 pages of double-page information from phone bills from every minister, I understand.
But that was all in the public domain. I mean, that was part of the terms of reference when the inquiry was established.
But this response is a response to a leak which was embarrassing to you. It's subsequently resulted in...
Well, actually, it wasn't overly embarrassing to me. It was just a situation where I happened to be in China. Yes, it was a sensitive document that would have been released on the Tuesday and would have been my preference to do it when I was back in New Zealand. But you've got to remember the main accusations actually came from the media, that we'd leaked it deliberately when we were in China. As we pointed out quite clearly, we weren't responsible. So it's not a very complex story. It doesn't matter how many times you just sort of go around in circles on it. I mean, we established the terms of reference. The ministers, I think, and their staff absolutely understood that they needed to comply with that. And if there's a error, which there clearly was one, that was on the Parliamentary Services side that didn't understand the demarcation line between a journalist and ministers.
Has an inquiry like this ever been conducted in this way before?
Can't answer that question, I don't know.
Well, you've had several leak inquiries in the past. I mean, you had one into NFAT, was convened in a different manner, but you've had several leak inquiries.
Yeah. Okay,
They
well,
all result in this sort of trawling of information.
I think we'll just move on. Yeah.
On Wednesday you said that at no point...
Sorry, what was that?
On Wednesday you said in Parliament that at no point did Wayne Eccleston ask for information about journalists, that would be inappropriate.
Yep.
And nor did the inquiry...
And he
want
didn't.
information. Nor did the inquiry want that information. Is that incorrect now? Given that
No,
the inquiry did seek that information?
No, I think what's quite clear, well, that's my understanding of the situation, is that there's no question that later on Mr Henry wanted to understand the content of that, but to do that he had to go through Mr Dunne. That's a very different issue.
Did Wayne Eccleston know about the fact that the emails had been sent on to the inquiry before you?
No, not to the best of my knowledge. They found out on the Thursday night, I think, and I found out on the Friday mid-morning.
When do you expect the GCSB bill to be passed?
I don't know exactly. I mean, it's possible to be passed this week. We'd have to get through the committee stage on Tuesday and its third reading on Thursday, but it may not make it through that.
So you
There's
won't
4 parts of it.
You won't vote Members' Day on Wednesday before that?
No.
It gets through on Tuesday?
No,
If you're going to be
The House
around,
into urgency item, or...
no, it won't be going to agency. No.
In regard to more revelations about sort of spying, what have you, over the United States, is the GCSB used to downlink data from American spy satellites as they...
Oh, look, I just can't go into all of those things. I mean, I don't know exactly the reference you're making. All I can say is the GCSB always acts within the law. So, I mean, if I'd have to go and look at the context that you're talking about.
Well, these satellites collect information, but then they have to transmit it back, and they have to transmit it back through transmission agencies such as Waihopai.
Okay, I just can't and won't go into all of those details. You need to direct that to GCSB and they'll give you answers if they can.
Is there any sense that these spy satellites could also intercept communications in New Zealand?
All I can tell you is whatever activities they conduct, they do so lawfully.
These are American satellites.
Well, just same answer.
People are concerned about the GCSB and surveillance and that sort of thing from the public. Have you considered, or are you considering perhaps opening out more, informing the public more about what work's done and perhaps successes?
I think the point is that there is a lot more information in the public domain now than there ever was. And what's also clear is there's going to be significantly greater oversight and significantly greater transparency as a result of the GCSB legislation. So in so much that we can communicate, we do. And I think the Kitteridge report, which outlines the number of times assistance has been provided in the last decade by GCSB to other agencies like SIS or Defence, shows New Zealanders it's actually a really narrow group. And it was 88 cases.
I suppose the argument is, if the police, for example, can emphasise operations without head results, where they can say, this is a result of our work type thing, without sort of jeopardising their operations, why can't we do the same?
Well, I think we have given a sense of those. Did that last week, and ministers did that in the House when we were going through the legislation. And as I said on Breakfast TV this morning, most New Zealanders would have watched the news on Saturday night and seen that the US have put out a widespread warning about potential Al-Qaeda threats. Well, that sort of information is the sort of information that's gathered by sister agencies from GCSB, one assumes. I can't be absolutely sure, but...
There have been studies in the US that show that Americans are more likely to be killed by their own furniture than by a terrorist threat. I would imagine in New Zealand the rate's even lower. So what evidence can you provide that we have a threat going on that is greater than a sofa?
Well, I have a responsibility as Prime Minister to take national security seriously, even if you don't. And if you can't understand that there are potential risks in New Zealand, you can choose to live in that world. But I don't live in that world. I live in the real world where there are absolutely people that we get warrants on, and those people have either the capability or present a threat. The fact that there is a very low risk of all sorts of activities doesn't stop us doing it. What the GCSB legislation will do is allow us in very, very discrete and minor situations to provide assistance to build up a picture of whether there is a risk to New Zealand. And, go and look what Helen Clark said on Q&A. Is there a need for GCSB? Yes.
Right, to get back to the Andrea Vance and Peter Dunne matter, the privileges of the House seem to have been walked over in relation to this latest incident. Are you concerned at all about your relationship with the House and relationship with the rule of law?
No, I don't think so. It's go back to it again. It's a pretty simple exercise. Some terms of inquiry were set up. They're in the public domain. People who were undertaking the inquiry, in my view, fully understood those. There was an error made on a couple of occasions now, clearly, by parliamentary services.
There was an error made by the executive in terms of its relationship with parliamentary services. It put pressure on them.
No, I'm sorry, I just don't accept that. What happened was, my office gave authority for metadata to be collected about ministers and those records to be presented to the inquiry. Well, that was known. That was a known factor and quite appropriate.
Your office obviously can give permission in relation to ministers, although that has to be granted by the individual ministers. It seems that that's what the paper trail shows.
No, what the paper trail shows is that we set up terms of reference, and Mr. Eagleson, on my behalf, wrote to every office and every staff member that was relevant and made it clear to them I expected them to comply with the inquiry. If they couldn't have actually complied with that most basic level of metadata, then they would never have continued to ceased being a minister. Well, actually, all of that's pretty self-explanatory, and I think that's totally fine.
You extended that to two ministers who are not part of your government.
Yes, but neither of those ministers had any issues at all with that metadata being provided.
They were not informed that the metadata was provided.
Yes, they were. It was in the public domain that the inquiry would look at all of those records.
Peter Dunne has made it quite clear that he did not know that his email had...
Well, he need to read the terms of reference of the inquiry then.
But do you accept, though, that he and John Banks have got that report as leaders of support parties, not as ministers, because they were part of intelligence and security?
But I think it's quite clear. If you go back to the thing, you can choose to argue this thing in many ways, but if that data wasn't provided, just in terms of overall data, then you as members of the media, I think, would have pretty quickly said it was a whitewash of an inquiry.
I don't
So
think-
you can't have it both ways. I mean, you either got to say it's a genuine inquiry, which actually looks to get an answer to the problem, or it doesn't. Actually, I think the inquiry was established the right way, and I think that the authority was given by my office for that metadata. What is also quite clear is that when the content of those emails were requested, then at that point, what became clear is that my Chief of Staff quite correctly said that authority has to be given by the Minister in question, and that's what he refused to do.
So are you saying that ministers do not have to give permission for you to access their metadata? If
Well, not when an inquiry...
You, the Prime Minister, can just convene an inquiry and get people's metadata. Is that correct?
When an inquiry like that is established, yeah.
On what basis do you think you have that authority?
Well, they're ministers of the Crown. Serve at my pleasure.
They serve at your pleasure? I thought they swore an oath to the country and were responsible to the executive and to the...
Well, of course I could go around every individual minister and ask them to sign a piece of paper, but if they wouldn't sign the piece of paper, then they'd no longer be a minister, would they?
So that Peter Dunne and John Banks were expected to know that you were going to access their metadata, trawl through their metadata on the basis of the terms of reference that you announced, and you were...
That's what the terms of reference say.
Are you at all concerned about the constitutional issues that have arisen as a result of your activities?
Well, as I said to you, I think Parliamentary Services provided information that they shouldn't have provided, and they correctly have apologised for
There
that.
seems to be one consistent theme in this.
Can I just
It's
go
always
just
someone
down-
else's fault.
Can I just go
Either
down...
the Datacom guy's fault, or it's Jeff Thorne's fault, or it's the inquiry head's fault. It's never your fault, and it's never Wayne Eagleson's fault. Why is it never your fault?
Well, there are lots of things I make mistakes for, and when they do, and when I do, I apologise for those, and I've done those on numerous occasions. But in this particular instance, it's not my fault. What's quite clear is we set up the appropriate terms. What's quite clear was there was proper authority. What's also quite clear was Parliamentary Service made a mistake.
You've also said,
Thanks,
so
Raj.
Prime